He just spoiled my joke, but I want to say that I was actually talking about SVG tutorial here at the Lightning Talk a couple of months ago. And then I was giving a proper talk about SVG tutorial, and then I was talking about it at React Day Berlin. And I thought maybe you want to hear me talking about SVG tutorial today as well. So that's what's going to happen. But today I'm going to talk about the technical side of things, like how I was building this site and what rabbit holes I went down to. So just to quickly show it, this is the landing page. And then you have a bunch of articles, basically, where you have a main demo on the left, and then you have a lot of text on the right side. Some of these things are interactive, so I can drag this thing around and it shows what's happening. But it's mainly text and a lot of these examples with code snippets and demos. So this side is using Astro, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the most part. I'm going to give you a quick introduction of Astro, the syntax, just like how to make a component, how to connect components, how to make it work together with React. And by the end, you probably don't see that, but I'm going to talk about Markdown and how to define your content with Markdown. And at the end, I'm going to talk about how to customize your Markdown with custom syntax to make it for your needs. And before we start, just a fun fact, I didn't have time for making some nice slides. I'm actually having a flight in 10 hours, but I wanted to have the Astro logo here. So I went to Astro's website and I was right-clicking the logo, like as you do to download the logo. And what happens is if you right-click, then it jumps to branding. Isn't that amazing? Like someone thought to capture the right-click event on Astro's website and go to this because I think maybe you need to have a logo. I think that's amazing. So let's start. I'm going to talk some very, very basic fundamental things, like we are going to do a component that looks like this. Then we are going to turn it into a list, which has, just to have like child and parent components. And we are going to talk about how to add interaction to Astro. Now, this is a bit tricky because Astro is a static site generator, so mostly used it for static text, but you can also make things interactive. So how does a component look like? Components in Astro use the single file component, just like in Vue.js, if you know that. We have the template, the style, and the script in the same file. It's called .astro. If you only have a static component like this, then you can just have it like that. If you want to use styling, then you can have it in the same file. And this one is automatically scoped to this component. So I can just have the style for this div element, and it won't affect any other divs in any other components. Of course, you can also have global style if you want. You can use preprocessors like Sass. You can use Post CSS. So there's a lot of options. If you want to use Tailwind, you can also use Tailwind. Now, what if you want to customize this component and add props? You can access props through this global Astro variable, but this is not how you would do it. Usually, you have this front section with this triple dash, which is a server-side script. Here you can decompose this component, this variable. And if you're using TypeScript, then you can also define your types like this. Now, let's look at the other side of things. What if you want to make a list that is using this component? Oh, and by the way, you can bind properties with curly brackets, just like in React. Now, the other side of things, I have this server-side script again. I'm just having a normal variable, and then I can loop over and map it to child components. So I basically import the component. I'm importing an Astro component, and this is basically JSX. The documentation, it says it's JSX-like. I'm actually not sure what's the difference because pretty much you can do everything that you can do in JSX here. There's one minor difference here. Who can spot it first? Key. Exactly. Why isn't there a key here?
Because nothing changes.
Exactly, it's static. So this won't change. So we don't need a key. In React, you need a key because it's going to change. But other than that, the map function, the curly brackets binding to the child component, that's the same. What's also cool is once you define a variable in this server-side script, you can just use it. So you don't need to have any special exports or whatever. You just have a constant, and then you use it in your template. What else I want to say about this? I'm not sure. So how to make this interactive? Because Astro is a static site generator. One way to do it is add the regular script element, which you probably don't see in the back, and then just use regular JavaScript to manipulate the DOM. And I know it sounds crazy on a React meetup that you can still manipulate the DOM with plain old JavaScript, but it actually still works. Now, of course, I wouldn't do this. Like, I'm using script elements for like things like analytics, some basic script. And by the way, this is not just a script tag. Like, Astro is optimizing this, bundling it in nice ways. Just like with the styling, it's also having some magic around it. Now, what you can do then, if you don't want to use these old school ways, you can always just use React. So I'm having a React component that is doing exactly the same I was just doing before, and then I include it in an Astro component. Now, if you're confused that, this talk is about Astro and I'm saying that you should use React, well, not exactly. So let me show you an example. If you go back to SVG tutorial, I have this editor down here. And this is an Astro page, right? So the main component that's showing this whole page is an Astro component. Then the header, that's static. So that's also an Astro component. Then this thing is interactive. So you can move things around and everything is changing. So that's a React component. Now, what about the sidebar? The sidebar is connected with this component. So if I'm changing this value, or maybe let's change this thing, then it will change, right? Now, you might think that this is also a React component, but actually the sidebar is also an Astro component. And then all these little inputs inside of this are React components that are connected with this one, with Zustan. Is it called Zustan or Zustan? I never know.
American
Zustan?
Americans,
Americans? Okay.
Yeah.
I never know that. Anyway, so this is what's called the island architecture. So basically you have a static page and then bits here and there which are interactive, and then you're using React for that and connect them with a store. So there are different ways to load a React component. Here I'm using the client load directive. The client load means that I want to server-side render this React component, then load it to the client and hydrate it. If I don't have this here, like, by the way, I'm just importing a JSX component in an Astro component. There's nothing fancy about it, just simply import. So if I don't have this here, then it will server-side render your component, and it won't be interactive, that's it. There are some other ways as well. So you can set that you want to load the component only when it's visible, for instance. Like I think it's server-side rendering in this case as well. And then it will load the JavaScript only when it's visible on the page. And you can even set a margin, like when it's getting closer to the visible area, then it will load and hydrate the component. So it's kind of advanced. I think basically you can use it instead of Next.js, and I think it's actually easier and nicer. All right, let's talk about Markdown. Like, Markdown doesn't sound like something like web developers deal with. Probably you just use it for README files, but actually it's very powerful. So you can use Markdown in Astro to create your pages. So for instance, if you have a Markdown file in the pages folder, which is basically the router, then it will generate you a page with this content. And of course, this is not very nice, but basically you can use headers, paragraphs, links, and so on, the things that you have in Markdown. What's cool about it is that you can even have inline code elements in Markdown, and it will generate it with syntax highlighting for free. That just works. Now, to make this nicer, you can also add beginning section with this triple dash, but this time this is not JavaScript. This is YAML. I think it's YAML and not YAML. We should have a language class one day about things that you use every day, but you never know how to pronounce it because you just see them on a screen. So I think this is YAML. And here you have a special property to define your layout. In this layout, you can basically wrap your Markdown content into an Astro component. And here you have style. Here I'm also using global style because I'm not actually styling this component, but the content, which is coming from Markdown. And here what you also see is the slot, which is basically a child. Like in React, we have children. In Astro, we have slots, just like in Vue.js. And you can also have multiple slots, and you can have name slots. So you can pass on multiple things to the same component, and then it will display them in different parts of the component, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, so you can wrap things around with layout components. And I'm basically using Markdown for all my pages. So you can also move metadata to this front section. So for instance, I move the title up here, which is useful because then in the layout component, I can access this metadata. And in this case, I put it both in the title, in the head, and also use it as a header before my content. So this is how you can build up your page. You have a lot of metadata up front, and then your content in Markdown. Now, Markdown is nice, but it has some limits. So you basically have headers and paragraphs and links and so on, but you probably want to extend it with some more content. So with MDX, I think it stands for Markdown Extended, you can import Astro or React components inside Markdown. So this is what's happening here. This is driven by a Markdown file, and I have all my content, which is, you can be actually dynamic from React or static from Astro. Just to show an example again, going back here, basically this page is in Markdown. I have the title and the chapter, or not the chapter, the category in metadata. I even have this main example as a link in the metadata. Then I have some paragraphs, that's regular Markdown with a link. Then I have this thing, this is interactive, so this is a React component. Then I have some more paragraphs, then I have this thing that's static, that's an Astro component. Then these code blocks are just regular plain text elements in Markdown. It looks kind of interactive, but this is actually just CSS. And these are, again, some Astro components. So it looks a bit complicated, especially if I show you the code. This is how it actually looks like. So I have a bunch of metadata, have a bunch of imports. The first one is the React one. Then I have a lot of Astro components. I have CSS imported. Then I have just some regular Markdown paragraphs with links and whatnot. Then I import the React component. I have a header, so on. And I still haven't figured out how to use word wrap with MDX files in VS Code. So this is the actual file. Maybe I should have looked that up, but actually it works. And even though it looks a bit messy and unusual, I think it's still much nicer than if you had to define this with HTML or JSX, because it removes a lot of boilerplate for like divs and paragraph elements and so on. So you can also organize your Markdown files into a content collection. A content collection is basically your front-end database that you build up from Markdown files. Like here I can say that I want to have all my MDX files in the tutorials folder considered as a tutorial. And I want to have this schema for them. I want to have each of them have a title, a category, a suggestion, and so on. So basically what I do here is I have type safety for Markdown. It's not exactly matching, but just an idea. So if I'm missing one of these properties, then Astro will complain and it won't build. Now, what I can also do with content collections, I can query them. I made another website called JavaScript Game Tutorials because I'm unemployed and I'm having too much free time. And here, for instance, I have a collection for the tutorials. So these two are coming from Markdown files. I'm just querying the collections. I'm getting the titles of the tutorials from metadata, the text from the metadata. And then if I open one of them, then the description is from Markdown. Now, one tutorial is built up from multiple chapters. So I have another content collection for the chapters. And they just show up because I queried the chapters that belong to this tutorial, and I can just loop over them. Basically, I'm defining everything in Markdown, and then I can make the connections and references between them. And if I open one of the chapters, then this is also Markdown, even though it's quite interactive. So you can't move this one, but you can, let's say, move this one. Like everything here is basically Markdown again. The code blocks are coming from Markdown. It has some React Tree Fiber components, which is React. And also, if I go to the menu, then why is there a scroll bar here? Then all these things are also coming from the content collections. So I think that's pretty cool. You basically have a lot of free things, like generating the menu with very little boilerplate. I also have my URLs generated from Markdown. It's the same as the path of this Markdown file. You have to set that up, but you don't have to do too much to get here. Oh yeah, this is an example of how to generate paths from Markdown 5 Basic. You can get the static paths by querying a collection and mapping it into pages. And then this is also this file where you can display a page. So basically just wrap, like I just wrap here this thing into layout component downloading. Okay, that's not very important. Remark. Markdown is nice, but it has some limits, like even with importing components and so on. So what I wanted to do, for instance, is on this page, not this one. Yeah, that's a good example. So what I wanted to do, I have these inline blocks, and I want to be the circle to be green, because in the other code block it's green, right? Maybe you see it this way. And I wanted to have the properties as purple because the properties in HTML are purple, at least with my setting. And the values as blue because the values are blue. Now, this is not something you can do with Markdown, because in Markdown you can have individual styling for each element. So you can have inline elements with the backticks, but you can assign a class name. What you can do is just inline HTML, and then you can assign a class name that's completely by the Markdown. But I figured it's not very nice to have HTML here. And I thought this is a good example that I can just spend my weekend on and have the exact same result after spending a lot of hours with it. What I want to have is something like this, where I'm prefixing my inline code elements with a class name. Now, if you put this in Markdown, you would just have the element colon circle showed up on the screen. So this is not working. But there's a tool called Remark. And this is not specific for Astro. That's actually a tool that you can use for other projects as well. But I think Astro is using behind the scene, and you can fully customize it, and it's fully supported in Astro. So what I figured out, this is an example plugin. In this case, I could write a Remark plugin that is going through all the inline elements, like visiting all the inline code elements, then using some regular expression to break down them into a class name and the value, and then replace it with an HTML element in Markdown, which I would never see because then right away the Markdown will get processed into HTML. So this is like an intermediary step. And of course here, not the exact code is the important part, but you can do this. That's the important part. Now, to show you another example, I have like 3 more examples and that's it. The other thing I wanted to do, let's say here. So I have this inline code element, or inline, not inline, sorry. This code block, right? This is coming from Markdown. It's a completely static text. There's nothing interactive or nothing special about it. What I wanted to do is that if I hover over, like, let's say the circle element or the rectangle element, then it's highlighting the one on the other side. Like, and it goes both ways. Like if I'm highlighting the circle here, it will highlight it in the code. If I go to the rectangle, it does the same. So again, I figured out you can process this plain text and mark each line with, you can process it with a Remark plugin, use some regular expressions and mark each line depending on what's their content. And this one is just using some CSS after that to connect the 2 parts. Like there's no JavaScript here. And I went even deeper with this, and then I figured, why not just highlight the coordinates? So if I'm going over a coordinate, it will show it one by one. This is something, again, you can do by processing the Markdown with some plugins. And yeah, I think it's really cool. Now, the other thing I wanted to do, I was very happy about this, and I wanted to start a blog to write about it. I didn't have a blog before, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I also had an NPM package about this, which just to try it out. I never had an NPM package before. You know, it's like a bucket list thing. Like some people climb the Himalaya, I was having an NPM package. And with the blog, I realized, like this is also in Astro, what I realized I need a description, right? So where does the description come from? You can also have it in the metadata, but I felt like that's going to be duplicate code because the description is usually the same as the first paragraph. So we can also move the first paragraph up to the metadata and then also use it for here and also when you open the open the article. But it only works if the first paragraph doesn't include any elements, like doesn't include a link or an inline code thing. Like for instance, this one, I think it has a highlight thingy. This one has a link, and you can't move that into metadata because the metadata has to include things like string or number or stuff like that. So what I could also figure out is you can write another Markdown plugin or Remark plugin that will go through your Markdown and nope, isn't there a slide here? Yes, that's the one. So that goes through your Markdown, goes through your paragraphs, and right after the first one, it says like, okay, I'm done. But before that, it will extract the value and just like goes through things like if it has link or inline code or something like that, then it will get the text value, join it, and it will add it to the metadata in Astro. So then Astro can read it. So I think that's a cool example, and it's just a couple lines of code to extract value from Markdown and to change Markdown. Now, the last example I want to show to you today is the JavaScript game tutorials. Here I have a lot of code, right? Like all these examples have a lot of code blocks. What I also wanted to do is support both JavaScript and TypeScript. I have this language selector up here, and if I'm changing to TypeScript, then all the code blocks, some just appear, which were not here before because we didn't have types in JavaScript, and some just switch content. Now, these code blocks are plain text in Markdown. So if you have an error, then your editor won't catch it. And it's also a lot of work to define it twice. You to define it in TypeScript and JavaScript. And I'm kind of a lazy person, so what I came up with is I'm defining all the code blocks only in TypeScript. Then I'm using a Remark plugin to parse it with Babel into JavaScript. I didn't write this plugin, I just found it, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then it will put both of them into the Markdown file, and I'm using some CSS magic to pick one of them. I think that's pretty cool. Not so cool. Well, I take it. All right. Yeah, I think actually that's it. If you have any questions, and also you have a QR code somewhere, you find all my stuff here. I'm looking for friends, a job, apartment I have. That's good. But yeah, check it out. We find everything here. Do you have questions?